You're listening to Two Bobs, Conversations on the Art of Creative Entrepreneurship with David C. Baker and Blair Enns.
David, were you ever a fan of the gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson?
Not at the time, but I sure have enjoyed reading some of his stuff since then. And I think I like the darkness he brings to life.
Yeah, of course you do.
He's simpatico. It's like, oh yeah, everything is bad. No, but why in the world are you asking? What does that have to do with this topic?
Because I think there's a scene in Where the Buffalo Roam, and it certainly comes up in his writings, where he would have this deadline, whether he's writing for Rolling Stone or he's writing a book, and the editor would be pacing, waiting to hear from him. And it was the early days of the fax machine. I think they even called it a mojo, which might have been different than a fax machine. And then at the last minute, he would start faxing in just his notes, scribbles on a notebook and cocktail napkins, and the editor would have to put it together in an article.
So you still haven't explained...
I'm looking at these drawings that you emailed me and said, all right, here's what I want to talk about. And it's like, okay, Hunter.
Well, you seem to need some visual aids from time to time, so I thought I would just move beyond the words.
So let's see if we can stretch these two drawings out into 30 minutes. What's the topic?
The topic, I hear this from almost every one of my clients, even prospects where we have a nice chat, but we don't end up working together. They say something that sounds like this: I really just need more opportunities. If we get in front of a potential client, we are really good at closing that opportunity. And in that is buried all kinds of assumptions about they're ignoring the impact of positioning or lead generation, how they're maybe overstating their ability to sell. I mean, I must be weird because I don't think I'm a very good salesperson, but most people I talk with who run the firms that you and I work with, they believe they're really good salespeople, and what they need is just more opportunities to do that. Maybe that's right. You agree with them?
No, and I'm with you. I see the pattern everywhere. In fact, the last job I had when I left agency world and I launched Win Without Pitching initially as a consulting practice, I was working for an agency, and the owner said to me, well, you're getting your consulting practice off the ground. Why don't you continue to do new business for me? So we struck a deal, and so I did that for the first year I was out here while I was getting the consulting practice off the ground. And he said, hey, I want to pay you. He said, I'm really good at closing. I just need more opportunities. So well, I'm going to pay you based on the meetings you get me. And I said, I don't think that's a good idea. And I gave him my reasons, and we'll talk about those reasons. I'm sure they'll come up. But in the end, he was insistent, so I agreed. And I remember it was $600. I got $600. I think it was $600 for every meeting I got him. And then there were some bonuses when he would close the business. And so I think it was like 3 months in, I'd gotten him all these meetings and he didn't close any. And I said to him, so is it? And I made a lot of money.
Misaligned incentives, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, you want meetings? I'll get you meetings. How's it going? Closing those stupid meetings.
$600 for a meeting, and I'll give you a $100 bonus if the person is alive at the meeting.
And I have so many stories of agency owners who have entered into similar agreements with either individual business development people or outsourced business development organizations. And I'm sure we'll get into those. But I'm with you. I see the pattern everywhere. And I don't know if it is something in the nature of creative people or entrepreneurs. Everybody tends to think they're a good closer, but the stats, anytime I crack those open in any of our clients' businesses, it's like most firms, it's pretty clear you're not a good closer. And I think a good closing ratio is about 1/3 of like good, meaningful opportunities. Right. I think that's a pretty good ratio. And I think, and again, this is largely anecdotal. You might actually have some data around this, because I'm not the data scientist you are, but I think the typical firm's closing ratio is way, way below that.
Yeah, all I have is anecdotal data too. I would have said 1 in 4, so we're pretty close there. And if you flip that thing around and say, okay, now what I'm doing in this meeting, I'm going to treat it thoughtfully, respectfully, seriously, but I'm looking to see if this is one of the 3 that I won't close out of the 4, as opposed to, is this the one I can close? It's just a completely different mindset. Anyways, so to finish this anecdote, I was on the phone before this recording today with a client in Chicago, and he was just asking me, how do we prepare for these podcasts? And I said, oh, I'll show you an example. And so I pulled up this email and shared my screen on Zoom, and he just started laughing. And I said, what's up, Mike? And he said, I say this exact thing all the time. He read the headline, I really just need more opportunities. If I get in front of potential clients, we're really good at closing. So I hope there's enough to talk about here today. I do think that enough people will identify with this to at least give us a chance to talk about why I think this is sort of a bad perspective.
Okay, now this is the part where we talk about a diagram in a podcast.
Oh, man, yeah, this is good.
So when people do believe this statement, and so you and I have just agreed, we hear it a lot and we think it's almost always false or it's almost always overstated. Mm-hmm. So when they do believe this, what kind of problems does it create?
Well, the first problem that it really creates is minimizing the role of all the things that come before the closing process.
Yeah.
And for me, that's things like positioning, obviously, your lead generation plan, and so on. If you minimize the role that those have, then you try to increase the volume of your leads so that you can close more opportunity without necessarily increasing the quality of those. So I'm totally fine with that ratio that you gave of closing 1 and 3. And the way to make you more effective, I think, is not to raise the ratio to 2 and 3, but to give you more appropriate opportunities. I don't want to speak for you here, and you may not even agree with this, but I really feel like the better job you do in positioning and lead generation, the easier selling is, because there's never any thought of trying to convince somebody or tell yourself that this is a good fit, because you've already done all of that pre-work. So that's the big disadvantage in this, is that you just don't take the first parts of this seriously. In fact, you may just say you don't even need to be involved in that you're the principal, and so you step in at the sales close opportunity, but somebody else is shaping what your firm stands for and how you'll seed those opportunities and so on. That's the first big one.
Yeah, all that other work goes undone or gets delegated to others, and then you, the owner, ride in on the white horse at the last moment to close the deal.
And make all kinds of promises that other people are just rolling their eyes as you're making, and then you've impressed the prospect at this point, but then you disappear again, and then there's a bait and switch, and then somebody else comes in. It's the way things were done in the past, and we didn't really blink an eye, but we still have some of that out there. And this notion that I just need more opportunities, I'm really good, it also dismisses the training and the business that you're in, right? I mean, you have a built-in incentive for people not to believe this. I believe with all of my heart, though, that people really do need to think carefully about selling. And the main thing in my mind about that is to really change the whole focus to make sure that you are facilitating a great fit and you're stepping away from any sort of feeling of persuasion at this point.
Yeah, and if I put this in the Win Without Pitching framework, and we did an episode on this, the 4 conversations of the sale. So this idea that there are 4 linear, discrete conversations, and you need to understand, where am I in the sale? What conversation is this? What's the objective of this conversation? And what framework do I use to navigate to this objective? The first conversation is the probative conversation, where you prove your expertise and you move in the mind of the client from vendor to expert practitioner. So that encompasses positioning and lead gen. The second conversation is the qualifying conversation, where you qualify the lead to see if there's an opportunity there. That's a standard sales conversation. Then there's the value conversation, where you endeavor to uncover the value that you might create, followed by the closing conversation. And what you're saying here, and what I see as well, is so many principals in particular of the firm, they put all the chips on the last conversation, like they make the bet on the closing conversation. So they overinvest in that closing conversation.
Right.
And they show up overinvested in the sale, but they underinvest in the earlier conversations. So it's like, let's put all of our effort into that last conversation. And our point and the point you're making here is that, you know what, those preceding conversations, whether you think of them as conversations or not, but that work that needs to be done in advance, the positioning, the taking your value proposition to the marketplace, and then the careful vetting that should happen in the sale before you close, that's all really important work. And when you handle that work well, closing becomes easy. And somebody who says, I just need more opportunities, get me in front of people, I'm really good at closing, that's almost always somebody who has not done that early work, and they're continuing to overweight that last conversation.
Yes, that last statement you said is so critical. So those folks tended to not put the hard work in at the beginning as well. And they're also relying on techniques that smack of persuasion as opposed to helping.
You also make the case about it leads to over-promising. Do you want to unpack that a bit? I mean, if I'm understanding your chicken scratch properly here.
What I mean by that is they get to this point and they want more of these. And so here they are. I finally have the opportunity I've been craving. I can't let this get away. And that prompts them to say some silly things in the moment that are just really not going to be true. And it sets up the client relationship to fail quicker than it needs to, because these closing opportunities are so important to the person that they can't waste them. That's the second big challenge here, is that if they feel like they just need more opportunities, then every opportunity they do get is going to be viewed as precious. So they will tend to compromise because they're afraid they won't get another one for a while. The whole approach with new business in my mind is we have to have this belief, and it needs to be true as well, not just a belief, that we can afford to waste some opportunity. Because if we have the approach that we must hang on to every opportunity, then we do all kinds of really stupid things. Mainly what we do is we overpromise at that point. And that shows up in financial performance at a firm. If you look all across the world, the US where I am, Canada where you are, we don't have any monopoly on this notion of constantly underpricing our work in order to close it, and then constantly over-servicing our work in order to get paid. And that all stems from not understanding the sales process well enough and preparing so that we're free to walk away from an opportunity that isn't a good fit, as opposed to holding on to it even when we know in our hearts that it's not a great one.
Yeah, we all know what it's like to watch somebody clutch something too dearly, right? Afraid to let go. And you're saying it shows up in pricing in the sale and discounting in particular, and then over-promising or over-delivering once you're into the engagement?
Over-promising and then delivering even more than what you've promised. Yeah, that's what I see happening.
You're listening to Two Bobs, Conversations on the Art of Creative Entrepreneurship. Your hosts are David C. Baker, author, speaker, and advisor to owners of expert firms, and Blair Enns of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching program for creative entrepreneurs. For more information, go to twobobs.com. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling a friend and rating us on iTunes. Thank you. Now back to David and Blair.
So very often the agency owner who says, I just need more opportunities, et cetera, I'm a really good closer, they end up hiring an outsourced business development firm, outsourced lead generation. I think we've talked about this topic before. I don't think either you or I are big fans of that approach, but I know I see a time and a place for it. Mm-hmm. You see that pattern of going to outsourced business development firms to pile volume onto these closing opportunities? And what are the implications of that?
I do still see it happening. I don't see it happening quite as much, but there are more than 100 people combined at the firms that are doing this for firms in our space. So it's still a pretty big thing. So let's say I was running one of those firms and I had a digital or creative or marketing firm or design firm, whatever, call me and say, hey, I'd like to hire you to set appointments for me. one of the first questions I'm going to ask them is, talk to me about your positioning. I'm doing this for lots of firms. I'm setting appointments for lots of firms. So who am I going to approach? Who's going to warm up to the idea of a meeting with you? Talk to me about your positioning.
Yeah. What is it that I'm selling and who am I selling it to?
Yeah.
And they're going to want to hear really good answers to those two questions.
Right. Now, they're probably still going to take this project, even if you don't give them great answers, but they're not going to be as excited about it. And where I see the appointment setting working well, it's not very often, but where it seems to work really well is if the firm is already tightly positioned. We know exactly who our prospect base is, that set of prospects, and the firm just doesn't have the time to do it. But it's very established, and it's really a matter of doing something specific. And in that case, I've seen firms, I can give you specific names. I mean, I'm not going to now, but I can give you specific names of where that has worked year over year over year. And the firm will typically pay $7,000 to $10,000 a month. It's a minimum commitment of usually a year. Sometimes it'll get talked down to 6 or 9 months like that. The rest of the firms that use those services are usually excited the first couple of months because they get a couple of decent meetings and they get it off their plate and they feel like they're doing something by hiring another firm. But they hardly ever renew that contract, and they usually try to get out of it early because it just wasn't a good match in the first place. It's an attempt to do something that's legitimate. That is, we need to pay attention to our new business efforts more seriously than we have, but the solution itself is usually not the right solution. You feel like you're delegating to somebody else. It's sort of like saying, I really want to get married. I'm so busy. I just don't have the time to go through the dating process, decide who I want. I'll just have my parents do it for me. That works in some countries, right? But it's not something we would usually consider. I think new business and hiring, those are the two things that are the lifeblood of your business. And I'm not going to hire a firm to do this. But if you believe, honestly, that you're great at sales and the only thing that's missing is opportunities to talk to prospects, then I can see why you would be tempted to hire a firm like this. I just don't think it works very well. The other place it does work would be if you're a really large firm and it's a very traditional new business process and you know that and you're willing to play the RFP game, God bless your soul, then that could work as well.
If I think of the best firms that do this, and again, I'm not a big fan of this model, but the best, when you hire them and you say to them, hey, I just need more leads, I'm pretty good at closing, they'll ask you those questions. Okay, what are we selling and who are we selling to? And then they'll do an inventory of all your other new business assets. Well, do you have any reputation? Do you have any awareness out there? Have you already built a list? And if you don't have any of those things in place, increasingly, they're going to push you to develop those things. For that model to work, you end up doing all of the work that you're trying to run away from. It does feel like pushing a boulder up a hill. I think the purpose of us kind of jumping on this statement that we hear a lot is just to say to people, if you find yourself saying that comment, I just need more opportunities, I'm really good at closing, maybe trust us as a couple of people who've heard dozens, maybe more than 100 people say this, that it's almost universally untrue, and it's almost universally a sign that you are ignoring other work to be done on the business development front that actually makes closing easier.
Right. Yes. And if you go this appointment setting route, you're going to find yourself in some very demoralizing conversations where the other person on the other end is not nearly as interested as you wish they were. I don't know how relevant this is to this discussion, but I can't help but thinking again how we have this mistaken belief that the whole new business process is so fragile, and it just takes somebody who's really good at all of those final closing conditions to make this happen. And instead thinking, no, if it's meant to happen, it probably is meant to happen. You want somebody on the other end of the conversation who already wants to work with you for some reason. And this closing, not using your language, but using their language, the people that say, I just need more closing opportunities, That's not really the kind of conversation you need to have if the prospect already wants to work with you. You're talking about different things. There's less of the pressure and so on. Yeah, I'll freely admit, maybe there's not 35 minutes of things to discuss when we talk about this. I just really want people to rethink this idea that they just need more opportunities to close. I think they need different opportunities, and I'd like to see them concentrate. It is kind of a zero-sum game. The more you concentrate on positioning and lead generation, then the less you have to be all stressed out about each closing conversation because there's not the same pressure on it. It's a different thing. You're really exploring fit in a relaxed way, and you're figuring out how you can help them. And you're the one that knows all this stuff. I guess all this I've learned from you, but people just aren't. At least once a week, I hear somebody say this to me almost verbatim. It feels like there must be some book that everybody read, and I don't know it yet, but that must be the title or something.
Maybe there is. I probably have it in my bookshelf somewhere. So you're describing two different scenarios. In one scenario where it's like, I just need more closing opportunities, you have the classic sales scenario where it's like, I need more victims. I need more fresh meat. I need more people who invite me into their office and let me plug in the PowerPoint presentation and talk them into hiring me,
right,
versus the other scenario where two discerning professionals are having an open conversation discussing the merits of doing business together.
Right. And if you're drawn to part B, then concentrate on positioning, lead gen, and ways to facilitate a sale that are human and helpful. That's the nirvana that I'm aiming for.
That's great. Let's end it right there. That was a beautiful summary. All right. Thanks for this, David.
Thank you, Blair.
Thank you for listening to Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. Subscribe and learn more at twobobs.com. That's the number 2, BOBS.com.